Good morning, folks. It's 12 o'clock, so we'll kick off exactly on time, okay? And thanks and welcome for your interest in making financial power work for local places and your commitment to the conversation. I should let you know that this event is being recorded, and we will make the recording publicly available at the conclusion of this morning's event as well. We are scheduled to close at 1:30, but we can extend the running time to 2 o'clock depending on how the conversation progresses, and that's how we really want to take this forward. We want this to be conversational once we've had the input from our speakers. So a little bit of background to this. Development Trust and Trademark are delivering this information session and a number of awareness raising sessions on community wealth building. It's a time limited program that we're supported to deliver by the Department for Communities, and it will conclude by March 2022. And we hope to bring back to the Department for Communities a policy proposal around community wealth building for Northern Ireland. There are a number of dimensions to that work. The department itself is to appoint a ministerial advisory panel on community wealth building. There will be strategic engagement with senior civil servants across Engaged Communities Group and the Department for Communities, and DT&I and Trademark will be supported in that by Sarah Longland's current chief executive with the Centre for Local Economic Strategies in Manchester. And then separately ourselves, we are engaging a sample of 50 community anchor organisations from across the north to get a deeper understanding of their position with regards to community wealth building and what needs to be done to respond to the 5 pillars. And then we are obviously holding a series of public webinars and seminars, of which this is one.
Mom or Mary Fisher?
Sorry, excuse me. Which is one looking at the key pillars of community wealth building. So like these sessions allow us to reach out to a wider audience and to begin to consider the actions and the interventions that are needed to advance the agenda, particularly across central government and local government. And our advocacy as a community development trust network is on behalf of the third sector, on behalf of the community development trusts and associations. And we're keen to ensure that the voice of community, as we understand it, is at the heart of the policy debate on the 5 pillars of community wealth building, including the socially productive use of land and property, in terms of how we look at better utilising and managing public assets, how we develop new governance and management structures where communities can take direct control of common assets, perhaps through establishing community land trusts or even looking at new social public partnership vehicles if that's necessary to do that. How we consider a more progressive procurement of goods and services and developing a procurement process, with the cost of the services not the overriding factor, how we begin to continue, how we continue, I suppose, this debate around establishing legislation for a social value act and building social value criteria and tendering processes, how we invest in strengthening the supply chain to build an ecosystem of providers which support local employment opportunities, how we build a more plural ownership of the economy in terms of growing social enterprises, or small enterprises, community enterprises, cooperatives, municipal businesses, how we develop a fair employment and just labour market, which is in terms of working to move people out of poverty, removing our work poverty as well, removing 0-hour contracts, introducing the real living wage, developing employability initiatives, that give more opportunities or most opportunity to those who are furthest from the labour market. And I think potentially the new thinking in that is what is forthcoming by way of the green economy. And then, of course, in today's webinar, which is around making financial power work for local places. So, and that is about advancing local economic development and building community wealth. So we need to find alternative ways to increase flows of investment as opposed to primarily just focusing on attracting external, national or international capital, which has largely been the way we've taken this forward for a number of years in the north of Ireland, particularly through InvestNI and its predecessor, the Industrial Development Board. So one way to do this is to identify the financial wealth that already exists in local areas and to design strategies that perhaps lock us into the local economy. To do that, we may want to consider, for example, how we redirect existing financial wealth, such as that wealth held by local authority pension funds. How, for example, we may direct the NI Central Investment Fund for charities, which currently stands at 48,255,000 but is invested externally. I will drop the link to that into the chat room in a minute. And then how we support credit unions and community foundations play a more strategic role as local lenders and investors who can support business development and regeneration. So this afternoon session then will take input from several points of view and explore how we make financial power work for local places. And we want to consider the untapped potential of our local credit unions and the work of other financial providers, including community foundations and trusts. We'll hear from work ongoing across the UK and consider the challenges and explore, hopefully, the solutions needed to drive forward community wealth building in Northern Ireland. And as I said from the outset, we want this session to be conversational. We want it to be solutions focused. And to that end, I'd like to encourage you to use the chat room and the question and answer session, which will take place at the conclusion of the presentations. So raise your understanding of the challenges, and for you then to present, solutions focused ideas for us to take account of. So that's where we're at. That's the scene set for the next hour and a half at the very least. First up, we have Laurie Mccusker from Fermanagh Trust. Laurie is the director of Fermanagh Trust. He has overseen the development of Fermanagh Trust's work for 23 years. And prior to this, he was a community development worker with the Devonish Partnership Forum. Laurie's early career included work in the Department of Economic Development and as Economic Development Officer in Fermanagh District Council. Laurie is actively involved in a range of national, regional, and local organisations, including NI Community Academy. So Laurie is passionate about community development and the power of working collectively to improve people's lives. And I would add personally, Laurie is a strong advocate for the work of community development trusts and associations, and obviously leads one of the leading development trusts in the north of Ireland. So Laurie, can I hand over to you, please?
Thanks, Charlie. It's good to be with you all, guys. Good to see some familiar faces and some familiar names. So hopefully I can get set up here. Yeah. And okay. So making financial power work for local places. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Fermanagh Trust journey as an organisation and the organisation support and working with local communities. And I know some people on this call today have thankfully also been involved in that journey with some of the organisations in this district. So we're going to talk a little bit about internal, our own work as an organisation, but also external and working in partnership and being an outward looking organisation. I'm going to put a few images down the sides. These are organisations and initiatives we've supported over the years. Some of these go back well over 20 years. And actually, what it tells me about community, these were all about developing community assets, all of these particular photographs, and looking back 20 odd years later, it tells me a lesson about sometimes community assets are there for the short term, the medium term, not necessarily the long term. And things move and change in communities, and it's important to note that. So the Fermanagh Trust journey goes back, previous to my time at the Trust, it goes back to when the Trust was being formed and the formation of the Charitable Trust and some of the work that was done before the actual Trust was formed with the support of the Barrow Capu Trust. And this is an image of a community project in Bow in West Fermanagh, spelled B-O-H-O, not Boho, but Bow. And you see there is somebody handing over a cheque to the Bow Community Association to secure the old national school in Bow. And if you went up and seen that old national school today, you'd see a thriving community centre, which has been renovated, extended, outdoor space, outdoor play, etc., home to numerous organisations and the lifeblood and the centre of activity in Bow. And the foundation stone of that was securing the old national school into the ownership of the community and not letting that be destroyed, dismantled or sold out to the private sector. There's important lessons in that, and that is one of the foundation stones in the Fermanagh Trust work. Securing facilities in rural areas and towns and estates for preschool education right across this county was another foundation stone, helping groups secure the premises in which preschool education could become the bedrock for many for community life in those distinct villages and estates. And this is a project that also goes back with 23, 24 years, right on the border between Fermanagh and Donegal, where there's 12 householders who didn't have running water up to their houses in a place called Tullyvogie. And each of those householders aspired to have running water, simple basic amenity, but unfortunately because of the location on the border, etc., just didn't have the wherewithal to secure the support of the local agencies. So the Trust convened meetings with the residents, and each of the residents put money on the table. Fermanagh Trust put money on the table. Each of the residents then secured the money, in some cases from the local credit union, resulting in everybody putting money on the table. That money, £6,000 from the Fermanagh Trust and £500 from each of the householders, give us a packet of 12,000. We were able then to go and convene with Donegal County Council, who were then willing to utilise the money and more than match the money to put in the water scheme in Tullyvogie. The power of convening, the power of pump priming. Real foundation stones for the Fermanagh Trust journey. And the Fermanagh Trust as an organisation has learned from that, and our philosophy has really been about trying to attract, as a local charitable trust, a local foundation, to attract funds and sources of support from internally and externally, to generate our own social enterprise, to make sure we're sustainable within our own right, and utilise all those resources to make a difference in the community, to our grant making and to our community development support programmes. So as a community foundation, over recent years, we've been able to attract support both for the foundation's growth, but also for flow-through funds from a range of sources. And we've established and continue to establish different funds that do different things that make an important contribution to life for people in this community. These are some more of the funds that have been established. This is about local people working collectively to do good things and try to do better things on behalf of other people, and also drawing in private sector support that is either locally or from operating it externally, but operating in the district and around the district to do good things with those resources. Backed up with that, we decided that we wanted to practice what we preach, so we developed a strong foundation ourselves with a community hub building in the heart of Enniskillen called Fermanagh House. The building was opened initially in 2007 and extended into additional space in 2016-2017. And this is a community hub which offers office facilities, meeting rooms, counselling rooms, conference, training facilities. There's 13 organisations permanently based here, and a huge number of organisations utilise the space both locally in the town, in the county, regionally, sub-regionally. And that generates a substantial, an important income for us, which means, again, that independent source of support, of source of resources. I'm working with others to develop community assets. There's different images here. You know, at the very top, Cleanest Community Millennium Hall, which was opened in 2000. I think Michael's on the call, and Michael will be familiar with this, Michael Hughes. This was a community that raised nearly £250,000 from their own community before 2000. And then we were able to secure Millennium Hall monies and other sources of support to build this fantastic facility. Today, it's home to a huge range of activity from right across the community, a real community hub. The foundation stone was securing the land and then putting in place some pump priming money, and then going out, attracting additional local resources, and then being able to go to other sources of support, the Lauri and others, to put in place the final financial package. Tamla Women's Institute, another fantastic facility in the small village of Tamla. Below that, Mullockdon Community Centre, again an old national school, not lost to the community but secured by the community association with some pump priming money, and then being able to use that to attract in additional resources both from within the county and elsewhere. And the final photograph there is of the Ark Healthy Living Centre of Jenny Irvine. The Fermanagh Trust put down the first grant of £6,000 to secure 3 old derelict Northern Ireland Housing Executive properties in Sally's Wood, with support from the ITAC, the Urban Sound Trustee Enterprise Company, who matched that 6,000. The project was, the facilities was, the old properties were secured, and that found the foundation stone to the Ark Healthy Living Centre, a wonderful initiative in North Fermanagh in the town of Irvinstown. And more recently, we've been involved in pump priming and community finance and other initiatives through some of the wind farm funds. This is an example as a community gym outside Fermanagh. It's actually in West Tyrone where we do some fund to a particular fund, wind farm fund. And this community organisation, the partnership, came to us in Drumquin and said, we would like to develop a gym, but we need some significant seed corn monies. And so what was put in place was a grant package of £100,000, £20,000 a year for 5 years. And then the community association was able to use that, or the community partnership was able to use that to secure substantial other resources, including rural development monies. A fantastic resource in the middle of Drumquin, the Well Community Gym. And there's other examples of community facilities. This is a fantastic community hall in the village of Canolly. And up on the, you'll see in the picture is the names of literally a couple of hundred people. And those couple of hundred people are donors who contribute to the fundraising to get that hall up and running. And what those people have done is maybe put in place a monthly direct debit or an annual payment towards the cost of getting that hall. And then they were able to utilize all those donations and donations coming forward as a way to help secure the necessary resources to get the hall up and off the ground. And a wonderful hall it is, which the community continues to contribute to. So what more can be done to advance community wealth building? I'm going to mention 4 things. Really, I call them the factors of reduction in terms of community development and community finance. First of all, the single most important thing isn't the finances, the people. So what drives people to make a difference in their community? What are the skill sets and the capacity that they need? Very importantly, I think community leadership is critical here. Without community leadership, and I think we really need to, that before we focus on anything else, we need to make sure we have the people and the skill sets there to support the development of community assets. And tradition and history would show us that. And what we try to do in the Fermanagh Trust is try to support, connect, contribute, and where possible, help educate. But what's important is when supporting community asset development, we're supporting people and structures, and we need to make sure that asset block is in. And we've seen, for example, how in the former, for example, the International Fund for Ireland, investments in some communities and enterprise centres, etc., where that asset block hasn't been built in. And those assets potentially will be lost to the community if they're sold off because the assets locked not there. So the most important thing is people, and we're working with others, including Rural Community Network and Hollywell Trust in the West, to help build community leadership through a National Lottery funded programme. The second theme is around innovation, enterprise and expansion. And I think it's important we all work where possible in strategic alliances, partnerships and collaboration. We're doing that through the Community Academy and with the Resurgam Trust, and also with our partners on the Community Leadership Training Programme. But it's not always about one organisation doing it. Sometimes other organisations are better placed to make a real difference, but drawing upon support and collaborating with others. The third area is obviously land. This building, Fermanagh House, was built on local authority land. ITAC, I want to mention, was built on housing executive land. But it's a huge amount of land owned by the public sector, community-based organisations, churches, etc. So there's a lot of land out there. So, you know, maybe the land's not always in the right place, but we need to utilise and capitalise on the land that is available, that is in public or community ownership. And fourth area is obviously finance. And also, you see what I've said is finance and influencing it. Sometimes it's not about having the finances, but the ability to influence it. And I think sometimes we've lost the ability to influence it as much as we should. We have an over-reliance on the public purse. You know, can we influence the 1.1 billion of EU peace monies that is on the track? Can we influence more of the local government monies, the sports council monies, the heritage monies? I know we're going to touch on credit unions today, and I see Martin's here. Credit union is what I call the great resource we cannot access. Money that is being generated from within the community, for the community, but it's based around individual households and individual borrowers and lenders, or borrowers and people who put their money into the credit union. Traditionally, there's been very little lobby, or what I've seen, a very little lobby from the sector to try to untap that money. But for me, it's the most natural fit in the world, is where a local sports club or community organisation which serves the community could access the support from the credit union, and it's a win-win situation. And finally, I think there was more we can do with not-for-profit assets and joined-up thinking. Charlie, you've mentioned the Central Charities Investment Fund, which the Department for Communities manages. It's got a couple of hundred members who contribute to that fund. There's much more we can do with the assets that we have. This is an example of a local football club here, in a GA club in Bentley. They wanted to develop their own pitch and couldn't access external money. So what did they do? They asked the people in the community, would they become a patron? And on the basis that they were able to raise over a 4 or 5 year period of time going forward, over £100,000, they were able to then borrow that money in order to develop the facilities that the community needed. So sometimes we can look to ourselves, we can look to our communities. If something's of enough importance and enough value, then can people in that community contribute to it? And we've seen in a very small GA club in Fermanagh how this can be done, and that's been replicated in many other clubs and organisations. Sometimes it's looking to oneself before looking outwards. So we've had successful movements. We've had the wonderful credit union movement here. We've the GA, we've had the preschool education. There's a photograph down at the bottom of a GA club in Rosslea in rural Fermanagh. It's got 2 pitches, a training pitch. It's got walkways right around the pitches and up into the countryside, which are lit up at night. So if people have mobility issues, they can walk in the flat ground. If people want to do longer walks, they can walk further. It goes much beyond playing football games or hurling games. It's about providing space for the community. So there is successful movements. Some of them are able to expand and develop further. And there's important lessons from each of those movements about community wealth building. So what's the next wave? I think health and well-being, people-focused activity is going to be increase. What about a thought of paid advice and support services? There's already significant consultancy companies taking a lot of resources out of the sector. Could the sector do it better themselves? And of course, the environment and energy, where is the opportunities? With the exception of a couple of initiatives in Northern Ireland, we haven't really seen the cooperative movement or the not-for-profit movement enter into the community energy space. Is that something that we can do going forward? And as some private wealth continues to increase, is there an opportunity for some of that private wealth to be brought back into investment in social good? And finally, housing. I think housing will always be an area, but it's an area that continues to be untapped in terms of meeting the needs within local communities right across Fermanagh, right across Northern Ireland and further afield. And while we have some very good housing associations, we think much more can be done. So that's a few thoughts around from the view of the world from this space, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Plenty of food for thought there, and I'll come back to some of those points a little later on. Rachel, you raised your hand. Do you want to come in there immediately? Or did your cat do that?
I was just clapping. I was applauding.
I was clapping, okay. Okay, great stuff. Okay, like our next speaker then, I will come back to you with some thoughts or some questions, Laurie, and some of the matters you raised, and we get to the conclusion of this. But for now, we'll move along, and you've already made reference to the untapped potential, the role of credit unions. And our next speaker then obviously comes from the credit union movement itself, Martin Fisher, Regulatory and Legal Officer with the credit union. We've had a number of conversations with Martin in terms of his role with the Irish League of Credit Unions, the main trade association for credit unions in both the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland. Martin advises and assists the 89 NI credit unions in a variety of areas, and he's also a member of the Prudential Regulation Authority's Independent Statutory Practitioner Panel, that's a mouthful, representing all Northern Ireland credit unions. And I should add as well, because we do have the Ulster Federation here in Northern Ireland as well, we have Gordon Smith sitting in on the webinar this afternoon. And Gordon, certainly, if you want to add to anything that Martin may want to speak of, certainly, you know, just put your hand up and come back into it. So Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Charlie. Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be invited to present to you today for part of the panel to discuss building financial power in our communities. So I'd like to thank you, Charlie, Paul, and the Development Trust and I for the kind invitation to come along today. Thanks to Lauri for his section and the real work that they're clearly doing for the community in Fermanagh. I'm not sure how much you know about the ILCU, the Irish League of Credit Unions, but we're the main credit union trade and representative body on the island, and we offer a number of different services to our affiliated credit unions. What I wanted to do briefly this afternoon was just set out some of the background and the context for the credit union movement, especially in Northern Ireland. So the first credit union in Northern Ireland was Derry Credit Union back in this time 61 years ago, October 1960. That credit union now has over £107 million in assets and over 32,000 members. Credit unions were in the main, came from the 1950s and 60s, were established within our communities due to high unemployment. Banks weren't lending without collateral and without other restrictions, and money lenders were charging exorbitant rates of interest. So the community came together, very small numbers at the start, but it's led to what you'll see here in my next slide is quite a strong movement in Northern Ireland. So there's 142 credit unions in Northern Ireland, 89 with the ILCU. Charlie's mentioned our colleagues, Gordon Smith, who's the CEO of the Ulster Federation with the 40 credit unions. And then there's 13 independent credit unions, including the police credit union, the Harp and Crown. So in terms of numbers, I'll just throw a few stats at you. There's approximately 606,000 adult credit union members and 105,000 juvenile depositors. So that means approximately 36% of the population in Northern Ireland is a credit union member. If we compare that to a 3% rate in the UK, you can see the big difference that the sector has here in Northern Ireland. And on the island of Ireland, that rises to approximately 64% of the population. Northern Ireland, therefore, has one of the highest levels of credit union membership anywhere in the world, and it's part of a movement across the world of some 375 million members. In terms of financial statistics, we have total savings of 1.64 billion in Northern Ireland, total loans of 580 million, and we have total assets of approximately will be 2 billion. Based on asset size, Northern Ireland represents approximately 50% of all credit unions in the UK. Social impact. This is what kind of wanted to concentrate on today. So credit unions contribute to their societies and communities in many positive ways, many of which go unnoticed. We're cooperative organisations with both economic and social objectives. In essence, we exist to support the financial well-being and health of our members by providing local and affordable financial services based on their needs. We also seek to improve the well-being and spirit of the broader community in which we operate. What makes us stand out is that we're owned by our members and our earnings are passed back to them in the form of lower interest rates, dividends, interest rebates, and lower fees and additions and improvements to member services, as well as back into our community. That vital difference is our strength, and it's the ultimate secret of our growth and success, and it's ultimately based on neighbours helping each other. The model is so successful that a third of all personal unsecured lending in Northern Ireland is with a credit union. more than any of the individual banks here. We currently employ approximately 800 people across the movement, and that's both full-time and part-time employees. And of the 89 affiliated credit unions to the ILCU, there's approximately a £10 million total of salary figure that our credit unions are paying and putting into the economy. In addition, credit unions have to purchase services and goods to operate. Most of them are sourced locally. We support businesses and community organisations as well as individuals, and are drivers of local communities, local economies. Money loaned locally is often spent locally. Credit unions lead the way for gender diversity as well in Irish financial services. Across all roles, we have high numbers of women working and volunteering within our movement. In a survey undertaken at the start of this year across 190 credit unions, 45% of CEOs were female, 40% of managerial positions in credit unions are filled by females, 30% of chairpersons are female, serving on the boards are female, and 35% of vice chairs are female. Our member credit unions offer training, personal development, and a sense of responsibility and community involvement to hundreds of volunteers all across Northern Ireland. We have a credit union, Dunor Credit Union, based outside Dublin, which is Ireland's oldest and was established back in 1958. It's got a membership of about 5,000. And it's based in the south inner city side of Dublin. And about 2 years ago, it carried out an initial social return study. And its report stated that for every €1 invested in the credit union, €10 of social value was created. And that led to a total social dividend in the region of around €25 million was reported by that credit union in 2018 and 2019. We have the Irish League of Credit Unions has an updated project underway to try and measure that social impact in a much more robust and concrete manner. And that information is currently being looked at our credit unions, and we're asking that it's returned as part of their annual returns over the coming months so that we can get a macro view at both north and south to understand the social impact that credit unions are playing in our communities. And we hope to have that ready early next year. The next slide is highlight some of our priorities that we'll be launching shortly via our manifesto. On the lending front, our regulatory figures don't really capture business SME lending, but we do know that credit unions are lending to businesses and organisations in their community. The extent, if I'm truthful, to which that undertaken is mixed across Northern Ireland, but what we as the ILCU are doing is trying to build skills and knowledge in that area and try and build understanding so that our credit unions can have the confidence to try and when the local sports club is coming into them, to try and understand the figures and the grants that are coming through and understand that they have a robust business case. On the social investment side of things, we've been engaging recently with the Department for Communities, and we've been talking to them about the housing supply strategy consultation. Currently, credit unions, Northern Ireland credit unions, have about 1 billion deposited in banks and other financial institutions. We envisage that there could be approximately 100 million of that to support Northern Ireland social projects, in particular housing and potentially local authorities, economic development work. There is a precedent to that following successful lobbying by the ILCU in the last 2 or 3 years to the Irish government and the Central Bank of Ireland. Our southern credit unions are now permitted under investment rules to invest in social housing funding. That's been signed off in the last couple of months with a couple of schemes which have been developed, and there's upwards of about 800 million euro that's going to be invested to provide social housing in the Republic of Ireland. Our offer, is small compared to the total needs, really, as well as the offer from other financial institutions, but we're not really competing against other financial institutions on interest rates alone, but what we bring is an ethical and cooperative ethos which has supported our communities over the last 60 years. What I then wanted to end was just a really bit of a shameless plug for this evening to really understand the part that credit unions are playing in the communities. It's a new TV series, 3 parts, that begins on BBC One at 10:35 tonight. And it really is a great reflection of the positive role that credit unions are playing in their communities throughout Northern Ireland. The focus is going to be on credit unions and how they've remained in their local communities with the banks closing up, and highlight the many ways in which our credit unions are supporting the members. So I'd urge you to really have a look at it. And for those of you like me who probably be heading towards your bedtime towards 10:35, it'll be, I would imagine it'll be on iPlayer as well. So I really wanted to finish there, Charlie. So I'll hand it back to yourself, and that's just a short, brief overview from ourselves. And obviously, if Gordon from the Ulster Federation has anything to add there, happy to add in as well.
Thank you very much, Martin. Greatly appreciated. I look forward to watching the borrowers. I will not be in bed at 10:30, nor anywhere near it either. I presume that's not the borrowers that live under the floorboards.
No. That's the follow-up.
Altogether. Okay. Well, look, thanks for that, Martin. And I do have some questions. I'll put back to you in a minute. I just want to give it over to maybe Gordon, if there's anything, Gordon, you'd like to add. I'm conscious that actually one of the awards for social enterprise the other evening was given out to one of our fellow development trusts, New Horizons, Ulster Federation Credit Union, on Friday. So obviously they do play a significant role in Northern Ireland as well. Is there anything you want to add to what it is that Martin has already said? You have to unmute yourself, though. That's the one thing you do have to do. And we're not hearing you at all, Gordon, so I think your mic must not be working. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll leave that for now, and we will come back to you, unless you can do something immediately which makes us resolves the matter from your end. No, okay. All right, if there's anything you want to add to the conversation, then Gordon, you can just drop it into the chat room. Certainly we want your thoughts on that. Okay, so our third presenter then is someone, I suppose, who needs no introduction to me anyhow. He certainly has been around longer than the concepts of community finance or social finance or microfinance were invented. If anything, perhaps Niamh invented the definitions herself. So Niamh's director of her own business, Small Change, social investment, local economics and finance consultancy. She currently provides evaluation and learning support to Access, which is the Foundation for Social Investment in England, and is learning and evaluation partner for Barrow Cadbury Trust's Connect Fund. She has worked with Arts and Business NI since 2015, and she's been developing their new blueprint project to support arts and culture organisations in Northern Ireland become more resilient through capitalisation. She also works with credit unions in England. And when many people, she says, were fleeing cities for life in the country during the pandemic, she moved from beautiful Castlewellan, County Down, to the southeast of London, where she says there was not a tatty farl to be had. But there you go, that's London for you, Niamh. You did make your choices, what can I say, So welcome, Niamh, and thanks for giving us your time.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar names and faces. I have to say, I did a flit at the beginning of August over to London after 36 years in the north, and seeing the faces and names and hearing Charlie talk, I'm feeling homesick already. So I suppose rather than going through a kind of a list of projects or concepts, I wanted to talk about how it's possible to engage with the idea of community wealth building, no matter who you are, no matter what level you're at, because the concept is talking about being people-centered, community-centered, steering wealth in a way which is more productive and which manages to leverage. You're not just kind of buying something, you're not just paying for something, but you're trying to use that transaction to deliver extra social and community benefit. And I know that there are kind of two things that always occur to me when I think about it. And the first is, where's the wealth? Like we don't have wealth. We're not the people with the big resources and the investment and so on. And the second kind of thing that certainly intimidates me a bit is the sense that this is a big thing. We're talking about major economic trends and forces, and how do the likes of us really make a difference on that? So in terms of where the wealth is, the wealth is in the assets that we own as people, as groups, as organizations, and as communities, and in the flow of funds through the economies that we engage with. So small as it may seem, going to buy your cup of coffee in a social enterprise cafe is part of your redirecting those flows. And that is as valuable a small action as once you're building that up through numbers and numbers of us, as we are the people here, as standing outside a bank with placards saying, up with this, we will no longer stop funding fossil fuels. So in terms of the size of the challenge, where do we start? Well, I like to think of it as a kind of a structure that we're building from the ground up. And so for me, the starting point is making sure that we know and understand how to manage money. So I don't know about you, but in our household at home, when I was growing up, there were three things that you never talked about. Sex was one, politics was the second, because my parents were on their families were on different sides in the Irish Civil War, and then money was the third. So I grew up and I didn't know what my father was paid. I didn't know how he was paid. I didn't know if my parents had a bank account. I didn't know if they had a mortgage. And went out into the wide blue world when I grew up as ignorant about sex as I was about money, or as ignorant of money as I was about sex. And so starting with our kids, making sure in school that schools are teaching children to understand and manage their own money and to feel confident in making decisions. And then in workplaces, in trade unions, in other engagement, forcing wherever we can government and private sector firms to pay living wages, so that not just that we're relieving the stress on individuals and families, but that those individuals and families have the money to spend within their local economy, and they can open a credit union account and they can start saving so that they have those buffer accounts against financial crises. And you can see how that builds up to, what we're demanding are fair and inclusive financial services. It was great to hear Martin talking, and I have to say, Martin, you've ruined two or three things I was going to really raise a flag on, which is about credit unions having the power and the capacity to broaden out their financial services, to invest in lending to micro and small businesses, to invest in social enterprises, and to fund housing and so on. So it's great to see that the progress that's happening on that, particularly in the South, but also now in Northern Ireland. And that's not asking the credit unions to take risks that they shouldn't be taking with their members' monies. And I know that is at the heart of what credit unions do. And in terms of how the credit union movement in particular can empower people, I wanted to tell you, this is an old story of mine about Hannistown Credit Union in West Belfast. So when I worked for a charity bank, I was trying to persuade organisations to open ethical bank accounts with the bank so that they could then do that kind of lending, particularly to charities and social enterprises. And so up I went on a very cold winter's night up to Hannistown and into a rather chilly community hall, and to talk to the Hannistown Finance and Investment Committee, which was made up of four, I think, long time ago now, but about 4 women, all in their 50s, 60s, maybe a bit older than that. And to be interrogated by a group of committee members of older women who were so on the ball about not just about credit union finance, but about investment, and how the type of questions they needed to ask me about how safe their money would be, how it would be used, what the risks were, and so on, was an absolute inspiration. So the idea that all of this stuff is above our heads, that's not something that we can manage to think about, it's just too big for the little folk, is a lot of nonsense. And seeing the credit union movement as a way in which ordinary people manage to learn and educate themselves and make really big and important strategic decisions about investment is great. So you're going up then from lending to businesses, to mortgages, to farms, offers of insurance and saving services. You're building financial resilience and financial strength into communities. So I've stressed the credit union movement maybe a bit too much, but the stuff that people are doing around community share issues, about cooperative development and cooperative ownership and development of assets, I think is really important. And when Laurie was talking, it was reminding me of how much communities can do when they pull together. And that for many of us, the community facilities that we knew and used when we were younger were all raised in part, funded in part by somebody shaking a tin, the prize draws, the raffles, asking local businesses if they put up prizes, mobilizing community resources, which don't just fund facilities, but give people a real sense of ownership and control and power in terms of their local assets. And then we'll move on to the sort of stuff that Rachel will be talking about in much more detail and much more authority than I do. But expecting the anchor organizations and the powerful organizations that we engage with, and demanding of them that they do their part to ensure that community wealth flows towards ways which will benefit and strengthen local communities. So you can begin to see a kind of a wealth pathway, which starts from kids being encouraged to open a credit union or a post office account and putting savings in, that goes right the way up to the kind of major investment in social housing developments that we really badly need in Northern Ireland. And the lovely thing for me is that in many ways, Northern Ireland is actually head and shoulders above parts of England where I'm working now. I've been working quite a bit with English credit unions on social impact and also on mergers. And, you know, it's an unfortunate situation that only 3% of adults are members of credit unions compared to the strength of the movement here. There are some very good credit unions, there are some very well-run professional credit unions delivering a whole range of great services, but there are a lot of really weak ones as well. And what's really important is that anything that we've got that's really good, we strengthen it and we build on it. And then I know that the credit union movement and other of these pillar organizations are open to and welcome concepts and ideas from other parts of that community wealth building movement to help them build and deliver as well. That's me, Charlie.
Great stuff, Niamh. Thank you very much. Just making a few pointers there to sort of put back to you at the conclusion of the Rachel's presentation. So thanks for that. Can I just put a call out to you all again, like to use the chat room to present questions to our presenters, so that we can have a conversation around what you think are the critical issues in this. I mean, it's important that that you have your say, that you have your voice. I mean, that's the point of this for us, is it what it is that we're capturing and what it is that we're reporting back to the Department for Communities in terms of what needs to be done to build a policy framework around community wealth building, and needs to get sight of, you know, what are the main difficulties. And since this conversation is around how we make financial power work for local places, or what are the difficulties in doing that, and what do we need to be doing collectively as a third sector, but also, I mean, we have obviously the authority of our own power to act, and we should continue to do that and do more of it, like, but also, I mean, the power to change resides elsewhere as well, and we need to find ways and means of holding that power to account and presenting them with solutions to move forward. So I mean, really keen to hear from you in that regard. So do use the chat room. Okay, so our final presenter then is Rachel Bentley. Rachel is an associate director at CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, the national or UK national organisation for local economies. And CLES is an organisation that Development Trust and I have been working with now for a number of years as we have developed our position on behalf of community development trusts and associations, recognising the role and the contribution they make to local places, to the economy of local places, and to get recognition for the untapped and enhanced role that they can play in that regard. So we're really grateful to have Rachel with us. So Rachel's responsible for developing CLES's community wealth building pillar of making financial power work for local places. So really interested to hear what it is she has to say in terms of how that work is developing elsewhere across the UK and how it's being responded to. Rachel has advised local and devolved governments. She has supported housing associations and other public agencies around the UK and how to create more resilient local economies, to enhance public services and promote social justice. So again, really keen to sort of learn where that work is at, Rachel, and what sort of reception you're getting from the public sector in terms of responding to that. And then prior to joining CLES, I should say, Rachel spent nearly 20 years working in the dark side over at PwC, where she built up considerable expertise around financial services and specifically tax. And good for us, so that she left PwC in April 2019 to pursue a career in public policy and now working with CLES. So Rachel, you're welcome, and it's over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. Just checking, yeah, it sounds like you can all hear me. So following on from what Niamh said, it's really hard to follow such wonderful speakers, and I will try and add something useful and a different dimension. But what I've been trying to do is to make it so that finance is something for everyone. And I just think there is that point that we often come across thinking about those barriers, that people just don't feel comfortable talking about finance, or some people don't. So there's a kind of literacy and a confidence issue, but also on the flip side, there's a kind of, this isn't for you. You know, you're doing nice stuff, you know, but you know, money isn't for you. And the way that I like to phrase it is thinking about IT and digital. I am not comfortable with IT and digital, but I'm living in a world where I have to be. And I think that's kind of the argument that we're trying to advance around finance. And then the second thing I was going to say is that I think, following on from what Niamh said, there's a lot of money. You know, we often think that that we're all strapped for cash, but actually there's a ton of money floating around the UK, and it's about making sure, as I say, that is kind of channeled in a more purposeful and more meaningful action. And there are certainly people out there who don't support that ideology, but there is a growing awareness, I think, in kind of communities, but also kind of private investors, that there's a real need there. And it's about kind of thinking about how that can be channeled strategically. And I think Laurie's presentation was really interesting, because it is about that question, isn't it? What do places really need? And a lot of private businesses, private investors, they know it needs something, but they don't know really what it needs. So kind of having that conversation, is it a new sports pavilion or pitch, or is it something much more minor? Is it about, say, rewiring a community hall? Is it about improving the kind of the heating so that people can actually have kind of community activities? So just kind of tapping into that and then kind of really linking it with what can be done. But I'm going to try and share my screen just to show you some examples from work that we've been doing around the UK to see. Now, have you got the right, oh gosh, what's it called? Screen. Can you see a screen, just one slide? No? Yes? Okay, brilliant, thanks. So when we at Claire's, when we're talking about community wealth building, it's ensuring that those flows of investment and financial institutions work for local people, communities and businesses. So as Charlie said at the beginning, it's not necessarily about not having inward investment, but it's about having that kind of confidence and ability to say, actually, if you're going to invest in our local area, this is where we want to, this is how you need to do it, and this is where it needs to be redirected to. So one of our starting points has been thinking about kind of mapping. Now, this is the ugliest, worst kind of map, simple slide you can ever do. But I think really understanding where those flows are coming into your local economy. And this can be done, as I say, on a place basis. It can be done on an organizational basis, but really thinking about who has the influence there, where is the money coming in from, and where is it going? And so just kind of mapping that out as a kind of starting point really helps to kind of frame the conversation. And I think one of the regular points that you'll hear, for example, if a local place is very reliant on, say, car parking charges, and then you're kind of saying, oh, well, everyone needs to take the bus, how does that impact your kind of financial flows? So that's a very simple example, but just kind of having those conversations with various stakeholders so that there's understanding of where that money and those financial flows are going in a local place. But I think the main reason I'm here today is to talk about some examples of work that we've been doing in different places. And I think Niamh talked and Charlie also about kind of pension funds, and that really, there's been this huge push to divest from fossil fuels. And obviously at Claire's, that's something we would very much advocate for, but it's not just that kind of divestment from fossil fuels, it's that kind of redirecting of those funds towards something that's much more productive, something that really links into kind of what you need locally. And what we've been hearing from some places, going back to that kind of confidence and that capacity building, is you'll hear from the trustees of the pension fund and they'll say, oh, no, we can't do that because of our fiduciary duties. And it's about having that kind of ability to push back and say, well, actually, yeah, you do have fiduciary duties, but what does that mean? Not just in the short term, but in the midterm and the long term. And how are you investing in the local area, perhaps where your pension holders are going to retire? So things like social housing as a kind of long-term investment in a place, and can those funds, even a portion of them, be redirected towards that kind of local need? And I say one of the most interesting things I've done lately is kind of look at a few pension funds around the UK and just seeing how their kind of net asset value has grown over the past year, obviously when other areas are really struggling. So I think now is the time, and it's quite a ripe time to have those conversations. We've heard from Martin about credit unions, and certainly it is a source of pain, I think, to people based in England in particular, but also Wales and Scotland, to just see that the credit union sector here, it's performing a really important role, but it's a very small role. And there's just not that real understanding of kind of what they can do, what they could do. So we're kind of eagerly looking forward to some reform of the credit union sector, hopefully kind of either later this year or next year. Because what we often hear with kind of community wealth building is that, oh, you need to work with your local credit union. And then we speak to the local credit union and they say, well, look, hold on a minute, we can only do so much. And it's about seeing how those credit unions in a particular place can partner with other organisations, say housing associations, say the local council, GP surgeries, and really say, what is it that's creating a problem here? And what can we do kind of to come together to take action? There's been some really interesting work going on in Dundee, where they did a 3-year pilot called Dundee Money Action, which was looking specifically at the people who were the most deprived in their community, and really seeing what issues they were having, not only around debt, but around financial inclusion. So really looking to kind of maximise the incomes and address proactively and collectively those at the sharpest end. Because what they found in Dundee is that if somebody, say, was in arrears around their kind of housing costs or their council taxes, obviously we've got here on this side, is they were probably going to be in debt to other people and other, much more aggressive lenders. So kind of taking that proactive and collective action early. But probably the most relevant to this conversation is work that we've just did in Calderdale. So I don't know how many of you know Calderdale, but it's in West Yorkshire, really, beautiful part of the country, but it's very mixed. It's got some really kind of fancy parts with kind of real deep resources around that kind of community capacity that I think Lauri kind of alluded to. So you've got kind of, retired engineers, retired lawyers, retired bankers who've been able to do some really wonderful things around community asset transfers. But then you've got some real areas of deprivation, say in Halifax. And what they've got is they've got these kind of really committed local voluntary and community social enterprise organisations. And what they've tried to do is really come together with those organisations and say, how are you being funded? Kind of where are the financial flows that are coming in to support those particular organisations, which they know are doing really good work, say around homelessness, say around food, working with refugees, working with employability, for example. And what they found is that whilst they are, there's kind of multiple forums for these organisations, but they weren't really kind of reaching at what they aspired to, which was a real parity of esteem in those conversations between the kind of council and the local CCG, the hospital and the community foundation, and what those organisations really were wanting to say. And what they wanted to say was, in some cases, you're giving us enough money, but actually it's the way you're giving it us is really problematic. You're having us fill out 30, 50 pages of forms every year. So we're in the constant funding cycle. And actually, we know that we're the only organisation in place which is delivering these services, but you're still making us jump through these hoops every year. And so how can that be simplified? Whilst also recognising clearly that you need to be rigorous about where public money is being spent, but just kind of reducing that level of pressure, which actually is detracting from frontline delivery. The other thing that we were hearing, or that the organisations kind of really fed back to the council, is we face an unreasonable level of precarity. We are doing some of the most important services in Calderdale, keeping people housed, keeping people fed, keeping people supported, getting people into work. But actually, these funding cycles mean that it can be like 6 weeks before we have to start letting people go because we don't have enough money. You're then swooping in and going, actually, it's all right, we're funding you for another 2 years. So really thinking about how that plays into kind of mental health pressures, emotional well-being, and also people just actually saying, really good people saying, I don't want to work in this sector anymore because I just don't feel secure and safe in my job. And I don't feel able to make decisions around, say, starting a family, buying a home, because of that level of financial precarity. So what we've been trying to do, as I say, in Calderdale is really kind of equalise those conversations, make sure that the funding patterns, whether they be grants, whether they be through contracts, that they allow provision for that kind of core funding, that the value that the VCSE, very much rooted in place, and it sounds like many of your organisations are in your place, but that recognise that their value that they bring and recognise the value that would be lost if they were allowed to collapse. So looking at who they employ, who they spend with, and that kind of real presence in the community, and seeing that additional value beyond the economic value and the social value as one that needs supporting. Thinking slightly differently. So, one of the things I actually neglect to say at the start is that often I think all conversations around financial flows should probably start with, what are we actually talking about when we talk about finance? So, we've got this huge range from kind of public finance to private finance, but thinking about some kind of bigger actions. And I know your situation in Northern Ireland is slightly different around kind of how you raise revenue, but just thinking of kind of ways to to raise additional money. So thinking what we're seeing in Wales is kind of additional taxes on second and empty homes, and really kind of earmarking that and making sure that it's spent in a way that benefits local communities. Edinburgh is experimenting with a tourist tax. It got delayed by COVID. They call it the transient visitor levy, but thinking about that as kind of a way, if you've allowed Airbnb and others to come in and really kind of affect your local housing market, can you actually tax that and rechannel those funds in a way that really benefits the people who are there, who are getting priced out of their market, and actually trying to do that proactively rather than retrospectively. Another one that we've heard is around kind of encouraging good tax conduct from suppliers. So once again, going back to those kind of real generative organisations, if you've got social enterprises that are supplying public supply chains, kind of giving extra points, for good behaviour for people who are transparent, are rooted in place. And so you can't necessarily exclude ones who aren't, but kind of giving preference or extra points for those who are. The last one I want to mention is the community municipal investment bonds. And what we've seen is these kind of really taking hold in various places across England. And I think there's one going to be taking place in Wales before the end of 2021. And what that is doing is looking at kind of crowdfunding. So they've typically been used so far for greening projects, so electric vehicle charging points, solar panels on schools, but there's no reason to say that they couldn't be used for kind of other social purposes. And the way that these community investment bonds work is they are raised, typically I think the ones that have been done to date, up to £1 million, and they can crowdfund small investments, say £5 each. That's the minimum investment, and they are interest bearing, so you get some money back. So thinking about kind of Niamh's point around kind of getting people, kind of young people in early. So this idea that you're getting some return, you can always gift back your interest that is then used for kind of non-income generating investments, but using these investment bonds as a way to kind of fund those extra nice to haves that we really, people want to have, tapping into those pockets that are deeper than some, to fund things in areas which wouldn't otherwise be able to afford them. And as I say, kind of really tapping into those, that idea of kind of this is our collective space, and we want to improve it for everybody. In addition to community municipal investment bonds, which I say they're up to £1 million typically, I mean, they could go bigger. But you're also seeing the use of kind of crowdfunding platforms. So that may be £5,000, £10,000, £15,000, could be more. But really, once again, kind of using those stories, sharing what communities really need, what community groups really need, and making sure you're able to kind of bring in those kind of private investors, whether they be big or small, to contribute to something. And then building that kind of social value and that shared sense of like, this is ours, this is mine, and this is something that we own collectively as a community. So yeah, I guess I would just leave it, my final slide with kind of when you're having these conversations in your local area, is kind of what could we learn from you? Kind of where are those acorns? This doesn't have to be 10, 20 million pound investments. It can be £500, that may actually keep a community group afloat. So where are the acorns and kind of how can we water them? Where are those barriers? Who is it in your local area or in your local community who's really saying this isn't for you, or we can't do that? The naysayers. Like, think of the naysayers and kind of how can you win them over? How can you bring them into the conversation? And who are the people that need to be at the conversation to move these things forward? So hopefully that wasn't too much of a jumbled, garbled, flow of thoughts at you, and I will cease sharing my how do I do this? Sorry, digital technology, not my friend. Oh, here we go. New share, stop share. There you go.
Okay, Rachel, thanks for that presentation. So, like, a lot of food for thought across the 4 presentations. So I am still keen to get your thoughts and comments and input to what it is that you've heard. I mean, some interesting things you were saying there, obviously in your presentation, Rachel, resonate with with things here in terms of how Calderdale is engaging with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector and the endeavours or initiatives it's trying to undertake to make financing of the VCSE much more secure and regular. I mean, I think that's something that's been ongoing here for a number of years. Unfortunately, that's a central government responsibility here for communities who have been subject to one-year budgets for the past several years now. So that's been very, very difficult for a number of organisations. And there is an ongoing conversation around how do we reduce that bureaucracy in terms of getting financial flows, either grants or service level agreements or whatever, from the public sector out into the third sector. So I suppose that's interesting. There's a comment that both came from you and came from Niamh, which I thought was very interesting, which is around the exclusiveness of our understanding of finance and economy and money and where we sit, you know what I mean, as in relation to all of that. I mean, I would include myself in that space as well. It's not something that's relevant to what it is that we do. Like, so there are a number of organisations that undertake to challenge some of that. I know our colleagues Trademark do a lot of work in terms of education around the economy. But what do you think are the broader sort of interventions that are needed to support people to claim ownership of the economy, to recognise their place as individuals and as a collective, you know, within the whole framework of the economy, and take it back, if you like? Any thoughts on that, Niamh, Rachel? You're both on mute.
I'll try and be short, Rachel. So I think that economics has seen itself as a priesthood, and you have to be a very special man to get into the priesthood. And banking has been seen as a forum or a space for appallingly bad macho behaviour. The reason I got into this work was when I started managing an enterprise centre, and enterprise development training was being launched in Northern Ireland. And there were 4 working groups, basic and advanced marketing and basic and advanced finance. And basic marketing was all women, advanced finance was all men. And so I went to the all male group, and that's where I started with this stuff. Over the years, I've been patronised by experts, by kind of popping up in these areas. And so I think there's 2 things. One is you have to be a bit bolshy about it. And the other is that we should be encouraging and supporting each other. It's very hard to expect young women or young people from minority backgrounds or people who are lacking in confidence to make this step. But this stuff is not rocket science, and a lot of what people talk about in terms of basic common sense economics is actually rubbish. So I think we've got plenty of people here who have the capacity and hopefully will have the support and encouragement, and not to be afraid to ask questions that lots of other people sitting around really hope somebody would ask because they don't understand it either.
Thank you, Niamh. Rachel, have you anything to add into that?
Yeah, I would say I completely echo that. But I think, you know, so what I'm trying to do is when I speak to people who I would say are resistant, I say, look, I don't even think you're starting with the right question. You know, so what is the society we want to live in? What is the community we want to build? And kind of reframing it like that. Like, do you think this is what we should be, you know, striving for? Like, surely equality benefits all of us. Thriving, healthy, happy communities benefit all of us. And then start to say, you know, why isn't this happening? And as I say, going back to Niamh's point around that kind of traditional economic arguments, you know, you got to challenge those. Because the other thing I would say is particularly, and I think it's particularly prevalent here in England, is that you'll have people say, oh, but you know, the UK is this global finance centre, you know, there's money everywhere, and you know, of course there's loads of money sloshing around, and it's like, actually no, it isn't. You know, what we are is a global financial centre, and it's flowing out. So really recognising that if you've got a really valuable local organisation that cannot get finance with our current system, then it is broken, and that is what we need to address. And as I say, this isn't talking about millions. Often it's much smaller amounts of money, but you're creating a precarity by not allowing that kind of access to finance. So, because often they just don't even know it's a problem. And sorry, one other thing I just wanted to mention. I know I spoke very positively about Calderdale, but one of the things we did come across was somebody who was in a pretty senior position there in terms of finance. And he said, well, I just don't know what the VCSE does. And you were thinking, well, okay, well, we can tell you some really good stories. You know what? We can tell you some great case studies about the vital work that we're doing, but we can also show you it in pounds and pence. We can show you some really good bar charts that show how many local people they hire, that shows how much, you know, the multiplier is that they respend in the local economy, and just kind of winning them over, as I say, whether it's with stories or whether it's with numbers, but doing that and not being afraid to do that.
Yeah. I mean, the opposite to my question and my point, I suppose, is a contradiction, and it's illustrated well by all of the stuff that Laurie talked about, which illustrates a very strong, competent, and engaged communities across Southwest Tyrone and Fermanagh who've been in this space for decades. You know what I mean, in developing infrastructure and using using their knowledge, experience, and pump priming, regeneration through their own finance. So, nonetheless, I still think it's an issue. But there's a number of questions that have come in here. We'll go with two first, okay? I'm going to ask Niamh Doris to spotlight yourself, Niamh, so to speak, and just give us your question, please.
Thank you. So my name is Niamh Doris. I'm a councillor in the Coal Island area, and I would sit on Clyland and Dungannon neighbourhood renewal. So would work with an awful lot of community groups and, you know, with areas of particular social deprivation. And I think there's been really fantastic points raised today, and I'm really glad actually to be sitting in on this conversation, because these are things that I've been asking for quite a while, particularly around the financial literacy. I think in this area in particular, people never maybe had money before and they have it now and don't really know exactly how do you invest it, what do you need for a mortgage. They think that's very, very simple. Another major issue around here would be the loan sharks, provident loans and stuff like that. And people don't understand that. They think it's a nice person coming to their door, helping them to get through a difficult time. They don't understand. And that is honestly what we're dealing with here. That's the amount of financial literacy that we have within this area that has been, you know, socially deprived for decades. And that's kind of a starting base here that we're starting off with. So there was a lot of like interesting conversation around the social housing and stuff like that. I suppose one question I would maybe have out of particular interest, with the benefits now not going to the post office anymore. I know that quite a lot of pensioners in particular would be redirecting their money through to the credit unions, and obviously the majority of credit unions don't have a debit card, I don't think, and I don't know if they should get one personally. But how is that for you then? Are you having to get that money out to keep, you know, your interest rates down and all that there, or how has that kind of maybe changed the game for you? That's just one question, but thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful.
Martin, would you like to comment on that one?
Thanks, Dave, for your questions and comments. I suppose from the financial education piece, we have built into our operating principles that ongoing education is an important facet of the credit union movement, and I suppose maybe sometimes that focus is traditionally on children and young ones. But you're right, that if you miss out on that when you're younger, you're going to bring those bad ideas and bad tropes through into adulthood. But we do have financial education and inclusion programs through the Irish League of Credit Unions, which concentrate on primary schools and secondary schools. And even in the last couple of weeks, we've just launched a partnership with Twinkle, who do the kind of resources for the for primary school and secondary school teachers. So that should hopefully be a good resource. In terms of the post office question, that's obviously very pertinent. There are increasing numbers of Irish League credit unions who are signed up to the banking system and who do have access to allow online transactions to take place. Debit cards is a whole different ballgame in terms of both the costs associated with it and the ongoing compliance. So that's an area a lot of our credit unions would like to be on, and it's a conversation that's ongoing. Certainly in the south, a lot of our credit unions now have current accounts and do have debit cards. But as you say, marrying that piece with the financial education piece, do you want those people to have access to debit cards? So it's a difficult conversation, and there's no easy answer on that side of things. So I don't know.
Thank you. Gordon, do you want to add anything to that? I think did you have your sound problems resolved? You're still on mute. No, we're still not getting. I saw that you had headphones on there earlier, and I thought maybe that had resolved the problem for you. I was trying to bring you in there, but so we'll leave that for now. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Gordon. So I mean, hopefully we can get a comment from you, and I'll come back to you, Martin, as well as another issue that's emerged I want to get your thoughts on. Can I now just maybe move forward to Hugh Cox as a question, and Hugh followed by Eileen a question. Hugh, do you want to unmute yourself and pose your question, please?
Yeah, thanks very much. My name is Hugh Cox. I come from a very small, recently formed community hub, which has taken over a local primary school. We're actually in the process of buying it. I know we've had quite a lot of advice from DTNA and Uri and Mourne Enterprise Council. I think one of the problems we had, and I was interested in Laurie's comment particularly about the fundraising in Fermanagh, and in Rachel's comment about community financial ecosystems. Part of the problem we have, and I don't know whether other organisations can assist groups like ourselves, is in establishing community confidence in terms of fundraising. People need to be confident in what we can do. We don't actually understand as well what the community financial ecosystem is in our own area, and probably that's a lesson we all need to learn. We've been fortunate in that we've had quite a lot of donations, and we've had quite a lot of offers of financial loans from the community, from patient investors. But I feel that we could have done better, and we maybe could have saved an awful lot of time if there had been other avenues available for us to get advice from. We did actually approach the credit union in terms of assistance, and that unfortunately wasn't available. It is a pity. It's probably also a pity that organisations like ourselves maybe should be able to invest in credit unions. I mean, we all have bank accounts, we all have assets. At the minute, the number of banks we can use is diminishing rapidly and becoming much more inaccessible. But really, it's at a local level how we generate income ourselves, the advice we need, the type of people we need to approach, and the competencies we need to develop to do it. And thanks for the presentations.
Thanks, Hugh. I'm going to put that back to Lauri, if you don't mind. I mean, Lauri's presentation, I think, really talks about the richness in terms of knowledge and experience that exists in Fermanagh and Southwest Tyrone. And I did have a question, I suppose, about the significance and the importance of infrastructure, which is people and the connections between people and places as well, and the body of knowledge that is held by people in order to make many of these initiatives happen. Any thoughts, Lauri, on Hugh's comments?
Hugh, I'm a great believer in copycat community development, as I call it. You look at somewhere else, you network with them, and you learn from them. And Hugh, I'm more than happy to connect you in with some people who've done this type of stuff successfully. I think it's there's not only in Fermanagh or West Tyrone, there's many places where people have been able to connect with their community, and look, it's great to hear, Hugh, you've been able to access some support. And for me, every donor, every supporter is a potential another supporter. It's just how you market and communicate that and build awareness. And what I'm sure, you know, it sounds like you're doing good work, Hugh, in terms of securing that school and trying to move it forward. And, you know, a lot of this is to do with awareness raising and marketing and using Facebook and social media and type of stuff. But look, at offline, Hugh, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. And if we can point you in any way, and as I say, I believe, I firmly believe, and I think a lot of people in this call firmly believe in the power of networking and learning from one another. And I think that's a critical thing, Charlie, just bringing back to the second point you raised there about, you know, the power of infrastructure and local knowledge and connecting. I think that's what's so important in this field is, you know, where did the credit union, how did the credit union evolve? The credit union movement evolved. It evolved from one credit union and the people in the next village or the next town learning from that, and then them learning from another and them learning from another. It's same as the cross-community playgroups or the preschool education movement. One village looked to the other and said, why can't we have what they have? And then the best, how did they get it? Well, let's go and talk to them. Let's go and learn from them. And I think that power of movements is very important, and learning from one another. And I think that networking side of things, sometimes I think in this part of the world, whether it's due to political baggage or whether it's due to geography, I'm not sure, but we kind of cover or want to cover our homework, or people feel they want to cover the homework and let nobody else see it. Well, but actually evidence suggests that people are very willing to share, learn from, network with others, and showcase. So I think it's trying to utilize and find as many opportunities as possible for showcasing good things and sharing with them, and then hope others can maybe piggyback onto that and learn from it and take that on board in their own community settings.
Thanks, Laurie, for that. So, Hugh, like, I hope you take up that offer. I mean, there's a broad base of experience there in Laurie's head, his organisation and his connections. And
Yeah.
I accept that point around the importance of networking as well. When we are a network of community development trusts and associations, and our purpose, if you like, is to engage organisations with one another, individuals with one another, to share learning, practice and experience. And I'll also maybe just note as well, when Laurie's doing work, he may briefly mentioned it earlier with another member of DT&I called Resurgam, and they're running the Community Academy, which is essentially, I mean, sharing the knowledge and experience that they have. So, like, do pick up on that. Okay, there are a lot of questions in here, and I want to get to the questions around the investment of credit unions in traditional banking sector and mutual bank, and we'll come to that in a minute. I'll bring you in, Bridget, in a minute on that question, if you don't mind. But first of all, I'm just taking questions in the order they've arrived at me. Eileen, you wanted to come in there?
Good day, everybody. My question is maybe a bit on the left of all of this, but really interested in what Niamh and Rachel were saying, and echoes of my own particular experience in working with those people who have the power to fund and just are not listening. And I suppose for me, there's a skill maybe acquired, because I know that, speaking from my own experience, the work that we do within Women's Aid is about the work that's needed on the ground. And we find ourselves having to deal with people who have all the power and have the funding, but have little to no concept of the importance of the work that grassroots community organisations are doing. And I suppose for me, it's maybe there's some learning required by us to know how to influence better and influence using the correct language, getting onto the correct pathways, because quite often what you get is doors just closed in your face. They don't understand it, they don't want to understand it, and they don't want, sometimes I feel, to see the reality on the ground. I mean, I've worked with people trying to help them understand the work we do, and they have no idea what it's like for somebody who just does not have the money to buy the sufficient bread and butter that's needed that week. They don't have the concept. And I listen to my Watchman TV and I'm thinking it's very, very frustrating to feel that those people who have the power and the wealth have actually no understand or little understand. And I suppose I'm putting it across everybody. I'm sure there are some that do understand it, but my experience is they have little to no understanding of the day-to-day life of the vast majority of people. So how
Thank you, Eileen. Niamh, Rachel, do you want to come in or respond to any comments that Eileen has raised there? Niamh, do you want to come in first?
Okay. So it's a really good question, Eileen. And like a lot of these really difficult problems, there isn't an easy solution to it. Do you mind if I ask, Eileen, where are you working from? Sort of what area?
I work with Women's Aid and domestic and sexual violence.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I should have said geography.
In Uri, well, across the whole Uri Moon Down Council area and the Armagh, Goggin and Banbridge Council area.
Sure. So I think one thing to do would be to talk to the Community Foundation Northern Ireland. If you've ever got grant funding from them, say that you're asking for help, and they do a couple of things. They have ambassadors who are people that I'm not kind of criticizing the people who come into this, but they come in because they have influence and power, and they're people who can help. And part of what CFNI does is to bring them out on visits, to help them actually get that real experience of what people are living. So I think visits are a really good idea. And I also think if it's possible within the kind of those council areas to find any women who maybe have managed, who don't fit the stereotype we might have of people, of women who suffer from domestic violence, who are from, business backgrounds where it wasn't a matter of, it's poverty, but they were still suffering from that. And anybody who maybe might be willing to act as ambassadors directly for you for this kind of problem, this kind of issue. And then I think the third thing, which is not a great answer really, Eileen, but it's just to say you have to keep banging away on it. You have to just keep on keeping on, and it's a really important thing that you're doing. And I know it's really hard.
Great stuff. Thank you, Niamh. Rachel, have you anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would echo all of that, but I think thinking back to that kind of example from Dundee is so looking at the other partners that you can engage with who are coming in from a different angle. So the kind of I know the health systems are under real strain at the moment, but that recognition of the impact that kind of financial woes and other concerns have upon health and upon chances, schools, how poverty impacts a child's life potential. So yeah, but it's not a favourable context. I say once again, thinking about where I'm sitting in the Westminster context, there just doesn't feel to be much empathy of the reality of what it is really like. So yeah, banging the drum and those case studies that can capture people's attention.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks very much. Okay, can I bring in Bridget Meehan just for question and comment? There's a lot of comment in the chat box here about the investment of credit unions in communities and the challenges that exist in terms of restricting that action. There's comment about the mutual bank movement across the UK and its presence here in the north, and issues as well about the continued investment by credit unions in traditional banking sector. So Bridget, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, and sorry, there's my camera's playing up this morning, so I can't switch it on. I don't think I'm able to speak for the credit union really, but I can speak for the mutual bank campaign that we've got here in the north, the Northern Mutual, and it's part of, as you said, Charlie, the mutual banking movement that's happening over in Britain. We're using the same model there, and really what it is it's a challenger to the commercial banks that we've got now. So it's a genuine alternative to those. So it's moving away from that privatized system towards something that's more democratized, giving us more say over our money. When Rachel was talking, she mentioned quite rightly that there is a lot of money, a lot of wealth, but it's just what's happening to it right now. It is leaving the region. It's not been invested here. We need it here for ourselves to be able to deal with our, the things that come up for us, dealing with things like COVID, dealing with the climate crisis that we're in, and all the other issues that the people need money for. And the mutual bank is a way of what we think is a way of doing that. It's not the only way of doing it, but it's certainly a good model. These types of banks exist practically everywhere else in the world. We're one of the few places in the world that doesn't have them. So they do work very well, and it's been documented how they have helped, say, for example, in Germany with the great recession in 2008, how they actually, the banks, the mutual banks that they have there, stabilize their economy quite a bit. So our approach is that we would have a mutual bank. It would be owned by the customers, not by shareholders. It would be regional, and therefore it can only invest and work in this region only. And that would prevent wealth leaking out of here. It would be inclusive as well. So no one who lives here or is connected to here would be refused an account. We would see too that it would be important to increase access to cash. So more branches and more ATMs that have been rapidly disappearing. And better access for organizations like charities that often find it difficult to set up, if they're new charities, to set up a bank account. The mutual too, we would see as being an ethical bank. So it would prioritize this kind of social and environmental investments that are important to people. There was talk of, Laurie's work in Fermanagh, having to crowdfund, people having to find the money themselves. It's about being able to tap into that and actually assist that more and directly invest in the wealth that we know is generated here into those kind of projects, and into the development of cooperatives and social enterprises and small businesses. We also would see this bank as being one that's purpose-driven, not profit-driven. So when you answer to shareholders, which the commercial banks do, it's always about profit. This is why they're closing branches as well, because branches cost money and they think about the bottom line first and foremost. As a customer, you're not the first concern of theirs, and that's just a fact. You will come secondary to what the shareholders need. With the mutual, the customers will come first. So it's got that purpose rather than being just driven by profit. And all of these kind of traits combined, democratizing money in this way and allowing wealth to be retained in the region, will make us more resilient and will help us manage the kind of crises that we're going to be facing as we go deeper into the environmental crisis.
Thanks
so that was kind of just
Bridget.
a rough summary, just to give you some information, but we'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested about the campaign.
Great, Bridget. Thanks very much. Thanks for your input there. I want to maybe just line up Nolene or Louise from the Participatory Budgeting campaign for a question after this. But first of all, I want to give our speakers the chance to respond to some of the issues that were raised by Bridget there with regards to mutual bank. Martin, can I come to you first on this?
Yes, thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Bridget. I suppose from a practical perspective, we wouldn't be able to invest all our credit union money in one community bank. We have regulatory obligations to develop diversity in an investment portfolio, and to the point that we invest in banks, that we have to do for regulatory obligations. In the past, credit unions really needed our money to lend to others. Now in Northern Ireland, that we're a much more mature movement, we want to put that money towards productive and economically rewarding purposes. In Great Britain, where there is more of a potential need for community banks, credit unions are much more reliant on local authority funding, grant funding. We are in a completely different place for credit unions in Northern Ireland. We're a much more mature, much more strengthened movement, which is you can see from the slides previously. I suppose from the mutual financial services perspective, we're concentrating on our credit unions and their ability to serve their members now and into the future. We do have a project underway at the moment, which is looking at the products and services members and non-members might need in the future. But I think it's just important to remember that we are completely different in terms of our to some of the issues in terms of the community banking that's taking place in Great Britain, and I'm not aware of any community bank in Great Britain, despite having local authority funding and backing, having got a full license yet. So, you know, in Northern Ireland, the number of banks, there are a lot of banking institutions in Northern Ireland, and that doesn't add to, you know, the likes of Monzo and Revolut and Starling. We have a different population size in Northern Ireland, and obviously the credit union movement is slightly different. Access to the existing financial services banking system is hard, so it's going to be tough. And, you know, serving low income families and members, along with keeping branches open, isn't a profitable business. So it's going to be a challenge for the mutual bank. But from the Irish League of Credit Unions perspective, we're concentrating on building up our credit unions to enable them to provide the best services to our members in our communities, and as I say, making sure that any excess money and surplus money we have can go to much more productive means. And that's why we're having the discussions today with yourselves, and we're having the discussions with the Department for Community, and ultimately it's about from a practical dimension, that we have to persuade the Bank of England that making these changes is not only the right thing to do, but it will protect our members' money ultimately. So,
thank you, Morton. Rachel, you're nodding there. You've got knowledge and experience of mutuals from your work and elsewhere across the UK. Do you want to come back on some of that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think there is a growing awareness that this is a problem, but you know, it's very slow. And as I say, if you would ask most finance professionals, you know, is this a problem? They wouldn't even know that there's a gap in the market between our kind of commercial banks and our credit unions. They just don't understand that the UK is missing this, whether you want to call it mutuals, whether you want to call it community banks, whether you want to call it regional banks, they just aren't aware of the problem. And I was going to say, you know, we had a conversation with our politicians' community of practice the other week, and as I say, just, you know, regional mayors, you know, just not being able to get kind of backing for these kind of ideas. So it is going back to Eileen's point. We've got to keep banging this drum and sharing the fact that this really is a problem for people, for businesses, that it just is not an even picture across the country in terms of access to financial services.
Thank you, Rachel. Niamh, any thoughts, comments on that?
Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. So the banking system is very hard to enter as a new entrant. It's going to be a really big struggle. But I do think that there isn't necessarily a reason why credit unions and a mutual bank couldn't flourish in parallel and couldn't see each other as part of the same ethical banking movement. It's definitely going to be hard to do it in an area as small as Northern Ireland, but I think there are really some really good people involved in it. And the mainstream banks only move when they're threatened by something. They're either threatened by regulation or they're threatened by competition. And I think that we have been really badly served by our banks in Northern Ireland. So I can only wish both movements success.
Thank you, Niamh. And finally, Lauri, any comment on the questions?
Well, I suppose the comment I'd have is I'd love as a charitable trust and foundation with assets to be able to invest in credit unions or increasingly invest in mutual banks. But I'd equally like to be, as somebody involved in some grassroots community organisations, I'd really like to be able to borrow from credit unions, and that the people in our community are members of, in order to bring forward some financial assets to enable those groups and organisations to do good things, on the assurance that we're currently going to the high street banks and borrowing that money. So, I just wonder, Martin, maybe what needs to take place to actually allow both of those things to happen, i.e. to invest in local credit unions, and also for those local credit unions to invest in those community initiatives that are wanting to do good things in their communities.
Martin, can you just briefly respond to that, and then I'll just
I suppose to your first point, Laurie, we don't have the legislation in Northern Ireland to allow us to have deferred shares in credit unions, which they do in GB, and for whether that's for better or worse, we're left with it in terms of a legislative restriction. But I suppose money isn't a problem from a credit union movement, and you'll be aware that in some senses, because of our regulatory obligations, we've actually capped members' shares and either an overall amount or for to try and stemmy that, and that's another problem. Maybe it was highlighted in some of the slides there in terms of we would like to see further regulatory capital change to enable us to release some of that. But to your second point, it's only in the last maybe 4 or 5 years that the credit unions have been able to accept corporate members and lend to organisations in a more formal manner. So it's been a slightly slow process in that regard. But I think that's because the credit, because it's a new area of lending, which is potentially has a higher risk. To our end, in terms of, I can't obviously speak for Gordon from the Ulster Federation, from the Irish League perspective, we've just got it launched a new SME lending pack there, which will be available for our credit unions and give them a bit more reassurance that if an organisation comes to them, that they can assess loan applications in a better way. But we need to have a conversation like we're having today to try and build up awareness within our credit unions and with social enterprises to try and build up that awareness and, as I say, ultimately build up the skills and knowledge of our officers to enable them to give you the loans. And I suppose it's not for that we don't want to give the loans in those situations. It's just a measure of risk sometimes, and a measure maybe in some cases that they don't have the skills or knowledge at this point in time. But that's a journey where we're absolutely committed to making to try and
thank you very much, Martin.
Source that.
Thank you. Okay, folks, we're fast running out of time here. We probably should have brought this to a conclusion a little bit earlier, but there's one sort of area I'd just like a quick comment on, which is around the work that's being led by the Participatory Budgeting Working Group. So, Nolene, are you there, and can I bring you in?
Hello. Yes, I'm trying to get my camera to start, but it doesn't seem to. So forgive me that I'm blanked out. I don't know, is Louise still there? I may wish to. I think
Louise has gone on. So
she's gone. Okay, I think I'd want to say something maybe about participatory budgeting as well, and this is about how you try and direct resources and money to what is actually needed in local areas. PB is about people having the power to decide how part of a budget is actually spent. And we're talking about funds and where money is, where the wealth is. And we know the departments, our executive departments, our local governments, all the strategies and programs that they have, putting money into our services, and they're trying to shape them. But they then talk about with the consultations they run, and they try to reach those parts, to get the more quiet voices on board to make the best use of these resources. And really what participatory budgeting is about is another process that allows local people to make those decisions. They vote on it. It's not the whole budget, but it is parts of. And that is about empowerment. That shifts power across to the local communities. So that when we're talking about the services and we know the value that communities, how absolutely essential they have been during COVID, that the statutory sector actually relied upon the community sector to run out and plug gaps in their services. This now empowers the community, those services, to say, these are the needs that we have. That's your program. That's the strategy. We will help you design it. We all have heard of co-design, but we will also empower the local community to vote on and decide how that program will then be delivered in local areas. I'll put a wee link, Charlie, in the chat to our local.
I do feel that ultimately at the end of the day, in terms of making financial power work for local places, citizen participation is front and centre, and I think we've a long way to go in that. I know Scotland has made a commitment to 1% of public finance being determined by citizen participation through PB, and we're nowhere near that yet. But nonetheless, if we are to level up, whatever that means, and citizen action, citizen engagement is key to that. I think in some ways we're maybe going forward, but we're also going backwards. We have substantial monies coming our way now through peace, and I think the decisions have already been taken, by the system as to how it is that money will be spent, and communities have been locked out of that decision making. So there is some way to go, So look, that I think sort of concludes our webinar. So I want to thank again our keynote speakers, Laurie Mccusker, Martin Fisher, Niamh, Goggin, and Rachel Bentley, for your very thoughtful and insightful contribution, and for stimulating the debate and the conversation amongst all of us. Look, if we fail to capture your input in the chat or in the conversation, please feel free to send us any comment to DTNI, to info@dtni.org.uk. It's really key for us that we are capturing the whole diverse opinion that exists around making financial power work for local places, and making sure that that's put back to the Department for Communities as well. So thanks once again for your time and your attendance. I'll just note to you very, very quickly, our next public conversation on community wealth building is the role of public anchor organisations in driving that agenda. So that's on the 27th of October, Wednesday week, as the undertones would have it. And joining us at that will be John Tully, Director at Belfast City Council, Louise Ward-Hunter, Chief Executive Officer of Belfast Metropolitan College, and Stuart MacDonald, Associate Director from CLES. So I do hope that you're able to join us for that event on Wednesday week. So thanks once again. Thanks for your time. Have a good day. Goodbye.